Hello everyone and welcome back to more Magic the Gathering lore. In today's video, let's continue with the unfolding story that's occurring in Battle for Zendikar. So far, we know that Gideon is gathering forces to face off against the Eldrazi at Seagate. The Vampire Lord Drana heads to join her forces with Gideon's. And Jace Belleron is traveling to the Eye of Ugin for more answers. Yet there's another major player in this story, Nissa, who's struggling to understand what's become of Zendikar. Of course, she knows the plane is under siege by the all-consuming spawn of Ulamog, but up to this point, she's always had the world's spirit as an ally. The very soul of Zendikar manifested as a giant elemental, which Nissa had named Ashaya. The pair wielded the element with such force that Nissa believed that her and Ashaya could ultimately take down Ulamog itself. But one day, a great and horrible pain struck Nissa, as her connection with the world was torn away. Along with her powers, Nissa also lost her companion, the spirit of Zendikar, Ashaya. In shock, Nissa stumbled into Seagate, which was crawling with Eldrazi. She was rescued and brought back to Gideon's camp, but her life was still in turmoil. She had promised the world that she wouldn't stop fighting until she could safely replant the seeds of lost trees back on Zendikar, restoring to it that which the Eldrazi had taken away. But without the soul of Zendikar by her side, she fears that there may not be a Zendikar left to save. Certainly, if Zendikar has proven anything, it's that everyone who stands against the Eldrazi embark on their own quest for redemption. Now, it's time for Nissa to take on a quest of her own. As a member of Gideon's camp atop a floating hedron, the aptly named Skyrock, Nissa was tasked with patrolling the perimeter. As a former scout for her elven tribe in Balaged, Nissa had the appropriate skills to hunt, forage, and defend the camp's borders from Eldrazi. Though compliant with her duties, her mind would often turn to Ashaya and the soul of Zendikar. So many questions still lingered. Was the soul lost? Destroyed? Did it leave her because she was unworthy? Will it ever return? Mostly, she wanted to know if there was still a reason to fight. Something kept her on Zendikar, a promise she made to a dying world, her world. Even as she tried to logically examine the situation, she would catch glimpses of her lost elemental friend in the corner of her eye, or casting a shadow behind her. As she turned to look, it would always be a fallen tree or a small rodent, but these signs only continued to build Nissa's hope. As she was out patrolling one night, she returned to the spot where she had collapsed in pain, the very spot where she lost Ashaya. Nissa enjoyed returning to this place. It was the last place she saw and felt a connection to the plane. She figured if Ashaya would ever return, it would be here. So far, no luck, but it was as good a place as any to rest up for a bit. Her sleep was interrupted by the shrill of a goblin coming her way. Although it screamed for her to run, Nissa instinctively drew her sword instead. She found what the goblin was running from. It was a horde of Eldrazi chasing the injured creature, believing it to be an easy meal. Nissa, who hated the Eldrazi more than any other Zendikari, disregarded the goblin's warning. The horde was rather large, but the spawn which made it were small, no bigger than stumps of trees. Nissa would not run from such creatures, disgusting, skittering, hurting the very soil of the world. They were never a part of the oneness of Zendikar. They needed to leave, now. When the first of the lesser Eldrazi came within range, Nissa swung her blade upwards, nearly removing half its body in a single stroke. The skills she acquired as a ranger so many years ago were flooding back to her. Wielding a blade, to a ranger, is a lot like riding a bike. Once you learn it, you may grow rusty, but you'll always know how. As the Eldrazi met Nissa's sword, they fell one after another. But the horde was ever growing, and unlike the Eldrazi, Nissa began to fatigue. She clenched the lost seeds of Zendikar in her pocket, the seeds she promised to plant once Zendikar was freed of these monsters. She was given these seeds specifically because she was a Planeswalker. She was told to leave Zendikar behind, it was lost. Take the seeds and plant them on another world, at least then, some part of Zendikar would live on. She remembered the promise she made then. She would never leave Zendikar until the seeds were planted in their home soil. Leaving the world would mean the very end. As she fought, strength waning, Nissa could feel the pull of her instincts. The Eldrazi were just too numerous. The likelihood of her survival was slim. She knew this, and her body begged her to planeswalk away to safety. She had to actively resist the pull to leave. She remembered the promise she made. Leaving now, even in the face of death, meant the world was lost. Luckily for this stubborn elf, a core noticed her struggling and decided to lend her a hook. The core's rope ripped through a pear which had climbed up Nissa's leg. Pulling himself into view, he instructed her to take those coming from behind, as he would focus the group to their front. Fighting together, Nissa discovered, was a lot easier than fighting alone. The pair managed to thin the swarm, at least enough to consider themselves safe. After the two wiped the gore which were once Eldrazi from their weapons, the core introduced himself as Munda. He figured with her prowess, Nissa must have been one of Gideon's scouts. He informed her that he was one of Gideon's squad leaders. Munda asked about the goblin which ran by, seeing if Nissa could point him in the direction where she ran off to. The goblin is a member of Munda's squad, a member who rarely takes his orders seriously apparently. Together, they began to track the injured goblin named Pili. Pili was a fighter, that's why Munda was out looking for her. To him and Gideon, Zendikar needed every man, woman, and child willing to fight if Zendikar was to be saved. Nissa had a different perspective than everyone else did. Zendikar wasn't something they could take back. The real Zendikar, the spirit of the land, was still lost. Before she could explain any of this to Munda, they were interrupted by the sounds of a sobbing goblin. It was Pili, crying next to a collapsed cave, crying out the name Leek. Between the crying spurts of the goblin, Nissa heard the weak whispers of help coming just through the cave wall. It was a group of goblins, trapped while seeking shelter from the Eldrazi. Nissa immediately called for Munda to fetch ropes and more men. As she peered between the rocks, she asked the group if any were named Leek, fearing the goblin Pili was searching for was among the trapped. Collectively, the goblins bowed their heads and pointed to the back of the cave, where 3 bodies were placed respectfully against the wall. Leek, the companion of Pili, had died after the cave collapsed. As the goblins were freed, they grouped together to listen to squad leader Munda. They would all be leaving to join him and Gideon at Skyrock, to join in the army of Zendikar. But still, Pili was left alone and crying. Nothing, not even the hope for safety, could console her in her loss. The goblin blamed herself. If she hadn't broken her leg, she may have ran faster and got to the cave before Leek died. She knew, deep in her heart, that Leek was in this safe place. If only she had ran faster. Nissa provided the goblin a shoulder to cry on, reassuring her that this wasn't in any way her fault. Still, the goblin pounded on her chest, signifying that, in her heart, she knew. With that, Pili stood up and reaffirmed her hatred for the Eldrazi, joining the others with Munda. Nissa too was reaffirmed. Just like Pili with Leek, Nissa knew that Zendikar's soul was still here, somewhere. Like Leek, it must have found a safe place, a retreat. But where? It hit her. There existed such a place, a powerful area which the world could retreat to if endangered. Colony Heart. The very expression of Zendikar's mana, the spot where all the plane's ley lines of energy converged. The ancient flower known as Colony Heart could have sheltered her lost friend. With renewed purpose, Nissa decided to leave Munda and Gideon. They were preparing for a fight, while she needed to go on a rescue mission. To return the soul of Zendikar to the world and reconnect herself to the plane, she needed to go back to her devastated home of Balaged. This time, she let her instincts pull her away and planeswalked in order to find Colony Heart. And that, my friends, is the story so far in the battle for Zendikar. Gideon may have lost another planeswalker in his army, but Nissa's quest should be worth an entire army in and of itself if she's successful. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Nissa's army of elementals could be enough to turn the tide against Ulamog? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and share it with a friend. It goes a long way in supporting future content. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.